In last Sunday's message, Cindy shared the story of a man preparing to fly for the very first time in his life. He was a nervous wreck, and so he began to recite the words of the 23rd Psalm as he was waiting to board the airplane. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," he said. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul." Well, over and over he repeated the psalm, comforting himself every time he spoke one of the phrases. But the other passengers, fearing he knew something about the flight they were about to board that they didn't know, those other passengers began to grow more and more nervous and anxious. Some of them even opted to take a different flight. But once the man successfully finished the flight and reached his final destination, noted preacher and pastor Fred Craddock, who had also been on the flight, approached the man and asked him why he kept repeating the 23rd Psalm. "Because," he said, "it occurred to me that it might have been others' first time flying too, and maybe they were nervous like me, and so I was trying to comfort them also." That's when Craddock said to him, "Look, the 23rd Psalm doesn't exactly belong to us anymore. It now belongs to the funeral home. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Well, he's right, I think. Most people hear these words spoken at funerals more than they do any other time or place. Today's lectionary text isn't very much different, especially verses 1 and 2, where Jesus says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many, many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go and prepare a place for you?" Well, just like the 23rd Psalm, lots of people hear these words also at funerals and memorial services more than any other time or place. The words paint the image of a great mansion in the sky, waiting to receive and welcome recently deceased loved ones. They're not exactly hope-filled or uplifting words for living during these COVID-19 pandemic days, much less this Mother's Day 2020. Except, maybe they are. In fact, maybe they're the perfect words for a pandemic crisis, as well as a holiday some people can't wait to celebrate, and others for whom the day brings pain or grief. Maybe these are exactly the right words for right now. And here's why. It's part of what's called the farewell discourse in Scripture, but it wasn't intended as a funeral passage in its original context at all. It's actually one of the most hope-filled, inspiring, encouraging, comforting, company-keeping, relationship-building passages in all of Scripture that I can think of. But what if? What if the idea of dwelling places in what Jesus calls his Father's home, what if that isn't just about a heavenly mansion somewhere off in the distance waiting for our arrival post-death? What if we considered another interpretation of dwelling places? What if dwelling places is also about earthly dwellings during our own lifetimes? "In my Father's house are many dwelling places," Jesus said. Now, keeping in mind Jesus' usual quest to connect with those around him by metaphorically speaking their language, that is, by using images and examples most relevant to the day or situation, it's helpful to remember that in its original context, dwelling places was really a traveling reference. See, it comes from the Greek, meaning temporary resting place for a traveler. That's what dwelling places means. And Jesus was speaking to people familiar with traveling as a way of life. It was common then to travel in caravans during Jesus' day. And so when caravans of people were traveling, there would always be this certain contingent of people who would go ahead of the caravan to prepare a place to stay for the night, a place that was complete with food and water and shelter, so that when the rest of the caravan arrived, it was like a campsite had already been prepared and waiting for them to safely arrive. So what if this idea of dwelling place that Jesus is referring to in today's text, what if it isn't just a place of living, but also a way of living? What if the idea of dwelling places is meant to make us think about hospitality and compassion for others and ourselves, travelers along the path of life, if you will? What if this passage of Scripture is meant to push us to think not just about where we'll live after we die, but also about how we live with and among one another right now, sort of like Jesus was doing in the original context, present to those around him. There's an old story told that has roots in lots of different cultures and religious communities. It's a story that's been titled The Parable of the Long Spoon. And it captures perfectly, I think, the sentiment and meaning of what it means to be followers of the one who says, "In my Father's home are many dwelling places." The parable features a guest entering a dining room in which the diners are seated at a long, fancy banquet table. The table is adorned with beautiful food, but instead of the typical eating utensils, the diners each hold long spoons to feed themselves. In fact, the spoons are so long that they're unable to reach their own mouths, and consequently, they end up starving, hungry, and rather gaunt. Then the guest enters another dining room. There, the table is dressed with the exact same food and the same long spoons. But instead of the diners trying to feed themselves, they're all feeding each other. And as a result, they are supple and well-fed, and the dinner is this huge feast and celebration. The contrast between the two scenes is an allegory of what some people have called heaven and hell. One scene presents a way of living that is self-focused with nourishment just out of reach. The other scene is a way of living that is others-focused, with a nourishing and flourishing existence. In my Father's home are many dwelling places, Jesus says. The idea of dwelling places in today's text, I think, is less about getting some fancy digs in the next life, in a house separate from the people you can't stand, and more about welcome, hospitality, and community for a people traveling on a journey. It's kind of like experiencing heaven on earth by caring for others now, not later. By giving of ourselves to those we know and those we don't, we experience something of the divine right in our midst. We experience Jesus among us by going ahead, like Jesus does, to prepare safety and nourishment for other people. And during these COVID-19 pandemic days, this passage of Scripture is more poignant than ever. Now, more than ever, as a follower of Jesus Christ, you have the responsibility to care for the other. It doesn't matter if the other is someone you like or you don't like. It doesn't matter if it's someone who is different than you or a whole lot like you. It doesn't matter if it's someone who has hurt you in the past or somebody who's helped you in the past. We are called, every one of us, we are called as members of the caravan and followers of Jesus Christ to be ever more Christ-like. That is, to go ahead of others, to prepare places for other travelers to receive nourishment and shelter on the journey. I don't know exactly what that looks like for you in your particular setting or station in life. Maybe it means you feel called to donate food items to the local shelters and pantries we support in Worthington and Columbus communities during this time. If so, a few of us are in the church building on Sunday mornings from 9 to 11 to receive your donations. Or maybe you'll feel called, if you haven't already, to clean out your closets and donate some new or gently worn clean clothing to a clothing room. We're here also for those donations as well. Or maybe you're feeling called to help in another way. Maybe you don't have the ability or the health to go out in public to buy or deliver items to donate. Maybe your calling is simply to keep others healthy by keeping yourself healthy. Maybe your calling is to stay home, even when it feels like you'll go bananas if you're cooped up one more day. but do it so that you don't risk unknowingly spreading the virus you may not even know you're carrying. Or, on the other hand, maybe going out is exactly what you feel called to do, to help someone else or to purchase groceries or supplies or donations. If so, for heaven's sake, quite literally, for heaven's sake, wear a mask. No matter how uncomfortable it might feel or how funny you think it might look, care for others by wearing your mask in public. Wear that mask to protect others, and expect others to wear a mask to protect you. This is what caring for others is all about, just as Christ cares for us. Hear the good news. You matter. You matter and you make a difference. And anything and everything you do in these pandemic days makes a difference, good or bad. You have that choice, not at all unlike the parable of the long spoons. You can spend your days trying to feed yourself and only experience loneliness and hunger. Or you can spend your days caring for the other in whatever ways you can and experience nourishment and companionship, even if it's from a socially safe distance. What you do today will indeed change life and living for others in all of the days ahead. So may you be that good news this week. Amen.